Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name's Jim, and I'm joined today by Brock, and we are going to be covering some safeties and some tight ends as we prepare for the 2025 NFL Draft. But before we get started, Brock, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am doing very well. So we're going to cover 11 players. We're going to start with 4 safeties. I should say we're covering 9 players. We're going to start with 4 safeties and move on to 5 tight ends. So the first player that we want to talk about is safety Billy Bowman from Oklahoma. So, Brock, what can you tell us about Mr. Billy Bowman?
Well, Malachi Starks, I think, is the consensus number 1 safety in the draft. But in my opinion, right behind him is Billy Bowman. I really like Bowman a lot for a variety of reasons. I think he's one of the more versatile players in the entire draft. I think that he plays with good anticipation, good discipline, above average hands, and he's always trying to strip the ball whenever he gets an opportunity. Unfortunately for Bowman, he plays on such a lackadaisical Oklahoma defense. Outside of him and Daddy Stutzman, they're really lacking for talent in a variety of places. So we don't get to see him really shine as much because opposing offenses simply just avoid him with relative ease. So when you put him into an NFL-style defense, I think that you're going to see him really blow up in terms of his production and just his abilities on the field. This is a player that you can have playing at free safety, a player that at times has been able to come to the box and also has been flexed out into that nickel corner spot with relative success. He can play both man and zone coverage. And for me, when you look at his measurements, this is a player that could rise very rapidly in this draft should he test well. However, there are some concerns with height and weight, especially at the NFL level. I think there's a general consensus that he's going to need to take some time to, put some weight on, get his body ready for the NFL. So he may not be a guy that's going to break out right away. But this is a player that when you get to year 3, year 4 of his rookie contract, is going to be a full-time starter, playing majority of the snaps, a player like that. I see a lot of disrespect, I would say, shown his way in terms of his draft stock by NFL GMs. I felt like, for example, last year, Tyler Nubin was a guy that I had ranked very high and actually had him graded as a first rounder. A lot of people did not do that because of the position and also concerns about, the physical traits. So he dropped it, and so that's going to have to be Bowman as well. So I know we discussed where I would think that he would go. I think this guy is a day 2 pick. Somewhere after the top 50 picks, I think he goes. But this guy's going to play his way into those discussions saying, man, this is a player that we should have drafted a lot higher.
Cool. So did you say that he is your safety too?
He right now is trending that way, yes.
Got it. So, and that would be, so he's in the neighborhood then of a Kevin Winston or a Nick Emenwari on your board, like he's in that conversation?
He's in that vicinity. He hasn't exactly broken through where I can permanently place him, but there are times in which I just go, wow. Right now, Starks and Winston, they're just 2 of the finest safeties in all of college football, so I have them a little bit higher. I think him and Billy and Nick are very close. So I say there's Starks, and then there's 3 guys, the 3 that we mentioned, that is kind of like in a circular rotation depending on the week of how high and how low we go.
Got it. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to our next player, safety Aubrey Burks from West Virginia. What can you tell us about Mr. Burks?
Unfortunately for me, I don't get to watch a lot of West Virginia film throughout the year, so my take on him is very fresh. Maybe not fresh is the right word, but it's very – I got more film to dive into. But from what I can see so far, this is another player that unfortunately has been sidelined in terms of his production because of a poor West Virginia team in general. But when you're looking at West Virginia in general, they started to produce some high-level DBs into the NFL. I think it's going to be capstone by Beanie Bishop last season. I think that this is a player that's going to be a rotational guy in the NFL. I think that this is a guy that can be very disciplined if he's entered a system in which he can truly set his feet in. I do have some concerns about him when he's placed into some one-on-one matchups, especially deep down the field. I think that he can be prone to making some mistakes. But overall, I think this is going to be a solid rotational player, but a guy that doesn't see a lot of high value. So I'm going to put him as a solid day 3 pick, looking towards more of the 5th round. However, what I really enjoy about him is that he plays with a tenacity, a little bit of a nastiness, and an aggression that if you put him in the right packages and right situations, he can be a player that can make a very big play for your team. He doesn't mind getting dirty, especially when it comes to going and trying to get like a loose fumble. This is going to be one of the first guys you see flying in there. So that's where I kind of see Aubrey Burks going. But again, this is a guy you never know when testing, because once we get through the first 4 safeties that we've already talked about, I think that we're going to see a drought on safeties for a while. And then when it comes to day 3, especially when it comes to those comp picks, this is where I see a guy like Burks going.
Okay. Yeah, I do think that this is shaping up to be a better safety class than we've had the last 2 or 3 years. That's my opinion, but we got a whole bunch of scouting reports to go through before we can come to that conclusion fully. But okay, let's jump to our next player, and this is safety Shilo Sanders from Colorado. So this is the other Sanders player in the draft. What can you tell us about Shilo Sanders?
Yeah, Shilo is a decent player. Definitely has his dad genetics in him. I think that there's potential for him, but he's not very high on my draft boards. I think there's some glaring holes in his game, especially when it comes to tackling. You can't play single high safety with him at all. You're just getting torched all day with him. I think Shilo, honestly, is more of a special teamer than an NFL safety. However, I think that he can provide some teams some value if they have certain packages designed, 3 safety packages in that sort of that range. But this is a player that unfortunately you can't leave on his own at current moment, or you will get burned by him. Something that I do appreciate about Shilo is that he is a physical player, and he does like to get inside and get dirty. However, that does lead to some concerns with his tackling. Um, when I look at him, I see a different version, but some of the same characteristics that I do with Jonathan Abram. Love to hit, love to get into the action. Will make the pick when thrown his way. But when asked to do some of the more fundamental things that require the safety of the modern NFL, he just doesn't get it done. I think that this is a player that may be playing outside of his era, potentially, and that's why I think that he doesn't go any higher than the 5th round.
Yep. And I think that there's going to be some character concerns as we go through the interview and the combine process. Personally, I don't think Sanders gets drafted. I think there's going to be some teams that just take him completely off the board. There's a lot of late hit, unsportsmanlike conduct penalties in the couple games I saw. He's getting flagged for things that NFL coaches will have zero patience for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As you all know, last name means a lot in the NFL. I think because of that, he will get selected. I don't think that high, and I agree with that. I think multiple teams are taking them off the draft board. I just don't think they want to deal with that headache that also comes with the last name, and that might not even be from him in general. That just comes from the media circus around the Sanders family. But I think there are some teams that are interested in that because it draws some attention to their team. I think that's why he will get drafted, because I think there are some teams out there that do prioritize getting views and creating content higher than they do with evaluating football players.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to go now to our 4th and final safety, and this is Keon Sabb, and it's Alabama. I forgot to type the team name in. Oops.
So Keon Sabb, I mean, he's another player that I'm not exactly sure where he falls at this current moment. There's a lot to love about him, especially from what we saw last year when he was a member of the Michigan Wolverines national championship team. Also, talk about timing is everything. What a great time to leave the Wolverines program. I mean, he did it perfectly. One of probably the finest successes, multiple Big Ten titles, national championship, and as soon as everything got bad, he left and went to Alabama. Now he can compete for another one. But this is a player that I think is another rotational guy that could eventually turn into a starter. I do enjoy his athleticism. His ability to make the catch is grossly underrated, and he has very good speed for a player in his position. I think that this is a guy that we're going to have to wait and see how he goes and compete in one of those Senior Bowl games or postseason bowl games to see how he matches up with some players across. And that's just kind of holding me back on placing him his evaluation right now. But I think something that really excites the palate is that he can play special teams at a very high level. I see him as a special teamer written all over, and his first couple of years, his speed and physicality allows him to get the field very quickly. And a guy that can be a rotational safety as he grows into a starter. I think Keon Sabb is one of those hidden gems, actually. I think this is a player that very low risk, very high reward. I think he's very disciplined because it comes from the Jesse Minter school of defense, and we've seen what kind of safety that he's been, what kind of safeties that Minter molds throughout his time in college and the NFL. I think this is the guy. Let me make sure that he has the right same physical traits before I make the comparison. Give me 1 second. So this is a guy that I could have. So Elijah Molden is a current safety for the Chargers, and he's been making some really big plays. Elijah currently stands at 5'10", 191 pounds, so a little lighter, a little smaller. But I think with Keon Sabb's explosiveness, he can produce in the way that Molden is producing right now for the Chargers. And just to kind of give everybody an insight into what Molden's been doing this year. So far, he has 20 tackles and 3 INTs on the season. I think that's what Keon Sabb can start producing by year 3, year 4.
Cool. And do you see Sabb as day 2 or day 3? If you had to guess how, and we're like 2/3 of the way through the college football season as we're recording this. So,
I see him as a day 3 pick. Round 4 at the latest, though. I think he goes early in day 3. But it's a player that I think could. Depends on, of course, how he performs and how he tests. Could rise into the 3rd round. I think something that's really benefiting right now is that a lot of GMs put value into the logo on your helmet, and the fact that he was part of a national championship team at Michigan, the fact that he's a starter at Alabama right now, has really played well into him. And should he have something that pops off the board, definitely top 100 pick. It could rise into being a top 100 pick.
Yeah. And you think his transfer to Alabama is a good thing? Like you don't knock him down because he transferred out of Michigan. Like for you, all those are thumbs up, arrow up.
Yeah, they are, and I kind of want to go into it a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to say I don't discredit anybody that stayed at Michigan. That's a star player. I like a Mason Graham or Will Johnson or a Kenneth Grant or so on and so forth. But Michigan had 2 high-level safeties on their team, and I believe Moore and Page are the last names. So Sabb was already going to be fighting for playing time in that situation. Plus, by going to Alabama, he gives him an opportunity to compete, and then secondly, to just play more and put more film on the table. So I think that's a guy that recognizes his situation and makes the best out of it. And, from a drafting standpoint, that's good. But when you're talking about GMs making notes for down the field, down the line, you're looking at a player that understands the business well and has adjusted perfectly. I think it's actually a benefit for him more than a detriment.
Awesome. Okay, so before we transition to our next position, Brock, do you want to tell everybody kind of who y'all are, where they can find you, and find all of your other content?
Yeah, so my name is Brock Vieira. You can follow me on Twitter at MNSToday, or everyone moved to Blue Sky now, so follow me on Blue Sky, Brock.Vieira. On Brock Vieira on there. I forget there's a dot in between. So I write for the Ravs Wire. I write for Team MBS Media, and I also write for Indiana Hoosiers State of Mind. I cover football for all 3 of those websites. Right now for the Rams, I do obviously coverage on the team, but also I do some of their draft stuff. And then for Team MBS Media, I'm part of their Team MBS Media draft crew with Jeff Barnes and Greg Richter. And Greg has been on the show so many times. And yeah, we just kind of go through all the prospects and go through everything. So that's what I do. My draft process actually begins now. What I like to do in the season, I don't like to dive too much into players. I like to start shortlisting guys. And then after the season is when I'll start doing my evaluations, because that's when you get to the testing and, those postseason bowl games. And all their film is finally complete. So you can look at everything and look at how growth progressions. So hopefully I'll be back on the show soon, and we can go through more prospects.
Awesome. So What can you tell us about tight end Oronde Gadsden from Syracuse?
So this is a player that, one, talk about legacy, right? I'm sure a bunch of people that will be watching this remember his father, the original Oronde Gadsden, from back in the 90s into the early 2000s. So Oronde Gadsden basically took all the talent from his father and just increased his football ability ever since. This is a player that stands at 6'5", 236 as written on there. He's a physical talent. He's very athletic obviously because of what his physical traits that he got from his dad. But at the same time, he is a player that can be flexed out and, do some things in that nature. Unfortunately, he hasn't played since the Cal game. So our kind of evaluation, I feel that, sorry, I was wrong player. Unfortunately, he's been playing this whole season. Last year, Cal, he had 8 receptions, 109 yards. And then previous game of Boston College, 9 receptions, 114 yards. He's been a very excellent safety valve for quarterback Common Core, who's been throwing interceptions crazy. When I watched him play against UNLV, so I was actually in the building when that play. Talk about somebody that better in person. That's Oronde Gadsden. And just to kind of remind everybody of what he did that day, 10 receptions, 142 yards. So this is a player that I have as like a next version of Isaiah Likely. I think that he can be a bit more physical. He can make defenders miss, and he's just hard to deal with. I think this is a player that when you put into like a 2 tight end set and he can establish a one-on-one matchups down the field, he's gonna make some teams pay. And this is a type of player that can truly take a team that's contending to the Super Bowl just because of so much of a nightmare he is to match up on. He's a day 2 pick for me. I think he goes in the 3rd. But do not be surprised if he somehow sneaks into the late 2nd. The only detriment against him is literally the position he plays. And, of course, NFL teams, do not value tight ends that high in the draft to try to look for them a little bit later. But this is a guy I don't think there's no chance he makes it to day 3 unless something ridiculous happens in his postseason evaluation.
Yeah. So to kind of set the table for the audience, we're sorting through 30 tight ends that are possibly so the podcast, we try to cover the top 175 players, regardless of position. We are sorting through 30 tight ends to be in the top 175. But Gadsden is somebody where you may not know who he is because he plays for Syracuse. But between, as Brock said, who his father was, and then just there are games where he is the best non-quarterback on the field. I've watched 2 Syracuse games this year, and maybe those were his best 2 games of the year, but he looked like he was just a man among boys. So this is definitely a player that's going to get drafted. As Brock said, he's projecting day 2. I am projecting day 2. But right now, my opinion is the media is not talking about him because there's at least 3 other tight ends that are consensus higher on the board. So nobody's talking about Gadsden. But when all is said and done, I think a team that needs a pass-catching tight end, this can be your guy. So you may not be drafting him because you need a blocker, right? That's not necessarily going to be the strength of his game. But when you need a tight end that's going to catch passes, this is somebody that you're going to want to keep your eye on as the draft cycle continues. Okay, next tight end, Bryson Nesbit from North Carolina.
Yeah, so this is a guy that I like a lot, actually. Unfortunate part is North Carolina has a quarterback right now, so we don't really get to see a lot of Nesbit really shine. But in the spots that he does get opportunities, he makes some ridiculous catches, some real circus level catches. This is a tweener kind of a player because, he's listed as a tight end, but he also be listed as a wide receiver. And because of that, I think that he's going to go later in the draft. He reminds me a lot of another North Carolina player, and that's Matt Collins. And Matt Collins, though listed as a wide receiver, and that's a player that I know that you know very well gym as he's now a member of the Buffalo Bills. Physically, man, does he compare to some of the more modern tight ends. Now, obviously, Matt Collins can't play tight end, and I don't think Bryson Nesbit will be playing tight end in the NFL. He's going to be one of those tweeners. But when you talk about a guy that you can put in and can flex out to create some real solid matchups physically down the field, but I also want to flex in to be an extra blocker, this guy can get it done. 6'5", 235 pounds, wait a year, get him through a standard NFL strength and conditioning course. I think you're going to see a player that's going to explode. I don't think that this is a guy who's going to put up a tremendous amount of numbers in the NFL, but this is a guy that's going to be fundamentally sound. When you throw the ball to him, he will catch it. When you throw the occasional 50-50, this is a player that can land with it. I think he understands how to exploit zone coverage very well. I think he's very underrated at doing that. And then, as I mentioned with Hollins stands at 6'4", 221 pounds. So you already have a guy that's already bigger coming to the league. Maybe he gets a little stronger, but a little more slender. You know how the NFL makes their players' bodies. And this is a guy that you can design packages around and can be a massive contributor for your team in a variety of ways. This is a guy that you don't really talk about on Sundays, but a player that can really make the difference for your team in a variety of situations.
Cool.
So also for where I think he goes, I think goes in the 5th to 6th round. However, I think he plays a lot higher than that level.
Okay, Gavin Bartholomew from Pittsburgh.
Pitt players on offense is such a hard thing for me because as much as they may impress on their own, mentally for me, I have like a mental block on any player that plays for Pitt in terms of giving them a solid evaluation if they play for the university like past 2005. I know everyone's looking at me and goes, well, that's a dumb way of looking at things. And I agree, but unfortunately, that's just the way my mindset is. But when I look at Gavin Bartholomew, I see a player that I'm honestly not exactly sure how to list him. I mean, he is your standard tight end. He does make some solid plays, but I feel like when you match him up against defenders at the NFL level, this is not a guy that's going to be able to create a lot of separation and really make some big plays. Of course, people are going to disagree with this, and honestly, at this point, everything's subjective. But I'm just not that big of a fan of his, unfortunately. I think this is a player that can definitely grow into being a player that can contribute. I think his length is a massive benefit for him. I think he also has a nastiness of physicality that's very typical of Pitt players that gives him success at the collegiate level that could translate to the NFL. But when I look at Gavin Bartholomew, I just kind of see Luke Schoonmaker all over. And I know that if you're a Cowboys fan, you're probably taking him off your draft board. If you agree with me on that comparison, I think that's why you got to stick. What's the right word? I think that's why you got to take his evaluation with a grain of salt. I think that's also why you need to be very careful on this type of player. I also don't think he's playing the right position right now. I think that if you're an NFL team that's looking for a modern NFL fullback, I think Bartholomew could be that guy that can turn into a Kyle Juszczyk-esque kind of player. A little more slender, more versatile, but a guy that can really make some plays out of the backfield, especially enhance your passing game. Should he be able to get into the flat or run the wheel route or do anything of those natures? But I don't see Gavin Bartholomew going any higher than a 6th round pick at this point.
Cool. So first of all, I love the Pittsburgh take. I think there's going to be a whole bunch of Miami Dolphins fans when they hear the Pittsburgh offense comment. They're going to be like, it's a good thing that you weren't scouting Dan Marino. I'm just saying.
Like I said, hey, pre-2005, I love Pitt players. Marino, Torrey Dorsett, Larry Fitzgerald, right, all those guys from back in the day. Pitt was producing offensive linemen at a very high level at those times too. But I think Dave Wanstead has, because when I first got into college football, Wanstead was the head coach at Pitt. I think that permanently damaged my view of the university since then. So I've been trying for years to kind of get over it. But I wanted to mention that so people can, just always give everyone my honest take on things. And Pitt is a very hard thing. Like, I was screaming at the Steelers when they selected Kenny Pickett. Like, what are you doing? And honestly, I feel justified doing that. So, the only Pitt player that I have had any, love for in the past, 2008, so what was that, 15, 16 years at this point, was LaShawn McCoy. And, that was for good reason.
Cool. Okay, 2 tight ends left. Benjamin Yurosek from Georgia.
Yeah, it's a guy I've been high on for years now. When he was still at Stanford, he has that typical Stanford tight end mold all about him, like Zach Ertz. I think it epitomizes the Stanford tight end. Solid blocker, good in space. Is not a player that's going to make a lot of flash plays, but can. And when you ask him to do the consistent things, he does. I think that's why you saw him go to Georgia, and I think that's why you're going to see him become a massive contributor in the NFL. Unfortunately, I think he has like a giant written all over him, and I would be surprised to see him in any other jersey besides the New York G-Men. But when you look at his numbers, I mean, they don't flash off the table of what he did, in previous years at Stanford, because he missed the first part of the season, and he's only played 4 games so far, so I think he's still kind of getting into his groove. So you still have to rely on the evaluations of last year, which even then he missed time. So that's also a massive concern for him. But I think that he's going to be able to get together in the NFL. And then when you look at his production yesterday, 5 receptions, 51 yards, and a massive win against number 7 Tennessee, a Tennessee defense that's severely underrated, I think that Yurosek proves that he's worth the risk. I think because of his medical history, he's going to fall. But I really don't see him going past day 2. I think he's just that good. And he's a excuse me. I apologize, but he is the prototypical NFL tight end. I think that, again, one of those players, but instead of year 3, year 4, I think in year 2, year 3, you're going to be talking about a guy that can potentially be an NFL All-Pro.
Yep. So before we skip to our last tight end, I think a point that Brock just made is worth talking about. Tight end is probably one of the hardest positions for a rookie to do well. And I'm in a chat with some Miami Dolphins fans, and Miami clearly needs a tight end. And one of the things I pointed out to them is that if you take the Dolphins 2023 tight end, and if he was a rookie, and like the Dolphins tight end in 2023 had about 300 yards receiving. And if you were to take that 300 yards and you just say he was a rookie, it would have been like the 20th best rookie tight end performance ever, right? Like, it doesn't take much to get a rookie tight end's numbers on the all-time tight end board, because Mike Ditka had the best rookie tight end season ever. Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid from 2 years ago were the only 2 that could even compete with Ditka, but Ditka's rookie season was still really good. So when you're drafting a tight end, don't expect a 1,000-yard season their rookie year. Even a 300-yard season their rookie year just means they're getting on the field, and that's okay. It's going to take 2 or 3 years for most tight ends to just kind of grow into the position, because they have to be able to block and they have to be able to catch. And normally you're asking a wide receiver to do one or the other. With a tight end, you're asking them to do both. So it's a tough position for a rookie to have production. So were you fact checking any of my stats? I could see you looking at your monitor there.
No, I was actually looking at something else in terms of height for our next player for evaluation. He reminded me of someone, so I wanted to see if that actually made sense or if I was just tripping. No, cool. I didn't need to fact check you. I knew that you were right on the money, because I thought Kincaid last year was going to come in and blow up the NFL, and when he didn't, I had to go back and see why, and I realized it's not him. It's just the way the NFL is designed. Rookie tight ends just don't have monster years. They need a growing process, because the game is so much different at the NFL level than it is at the college level, of course, but especially for tight ends. And the responsibilities are a lot different too.
Yep. Okay, so the last tight end is Mason Taylor from LSU. So, Brock, how do you feel about Mr. Mason Taylor?
You want to talk about a genetic lottery. I think that's the best way to put Mason Taylor. His father is Hall of Fame linebacker Jason Taylor. His uncle is Hall of Fame linebacker Zach Taylor. Zach Thomas. Correction, Zach Thomas, right? So, right, Zach Thomas's sister, Jason Taylor. They're the parents of Mason Taylor. I've loved Mason since he was a freshman. The only concerns I have against him is how much punishment his body has gone through over the years because he's been a constant ball carrier for the Tigers and in high school, and he's just been getting whacked and whacked and whacked. But I think he is, in my opinion, one of the best tight ends in the draft. I think that he is a gem. I think he's going to be a stud. I think that this is a guy that we're going to be talking about with high reverence in 3 years' time. And that's why I think that Mason Taylor goes no later than a second-round pick. I think that Taylor has been, unfortunately, he hasn't had as much opportunities this season as he has in previous years because Jane Daniels isn't there anymore. And Nussmeier, though he is a good quarterback, there are some glaring deficiencies in his game. But when you look at his film, I mean, what's not to love? This guy is a physical monster. He plays in the toughest conference and dominates. He has very, very good hands. He's very smart. He can do all the things you ask a tight end to do. Block, he can take out blockers one-on-one. Chip block, he's great at. He's great at getting at the field. He's great at finding space in zone coverages. I think that when you get to the NFL level where play action is used a lot more and you have quarterbacks that go in the center a fair bit more than how they do in college, especially at LSU, this is where he's really going to be able to grow. If he goes to a situation where there is a pure pocket passer, I think that Mr. Taylor is going to be a guy after 8 seasons in the NFL, 6 of them are going to be 1,000-yard seasons. This is how high I am on Taylor. Matter of fact, if I was a team that had a luxury first-round pick towards the end of the draft, I would go and select Mason Taylor. So I think there is a world and a scenario where we could potentially see Mason Taylor jump up into that first round, even above some of the more established tight ends. To me, he is my tied for number 2 behind Tyler Warren, but he's slowly ascending. The problem is that Warren, man, he keeps putting up so much great numbers at Penn State that it's hard for me to drop him. But I think that when you're talking about the full evaluation and see a player that can do everything that you require, I think Taylor is that guy. And quite frankly, I think that he is a player that could potentially have a much better career than the number 1 tight end in the class right now, Colston Loveland. So I might be a bit biased on this one because I just enjoyed his game so much for the past 3 seasons. But I think Taylor is that dude, and there should be no reason he falls below round 2. And again, I think this is a guy who could sneak into round 1, especially if there's a scenario where, for example, Loveland goes early for some reason. I think Taylor could potentially become the number 2 tight end off the board on day 1.
So I like that. So early in the season, right, I've got my player board and I'm watching college football, and I was watching an LSU game, and he made 2 plays really early in the game. This is early in the season. So I'm like checking, okay, where is he on the board? And I'm like, he's way too low. I'm like, okay, he's at least in the top 5. And I was just like watching one game, but I'm like, he reminded me with just how LSU used him of Dalton Kincaid. So obviously I'm a Bills fan. I see how Buffalo uses Kincaid. LSU was using Taylor similar, motioning him. Some of the, the routes he was running just reminded me of how Buffalo used Kincaid. And then as the offseason or the preseason draft, right? Because I consider this we're still draft preseason right now, right?
Yes.
The college season hasn't ended. As Brock and I record this, the Bills are going to be playing the Chiefs this afternoon.
So I'm so excited about that game. To me, yes. I mean, I'm a Chargers fan, so I love the fact that my team's playing on a Sunday night. But when the Chiefs and the Bills get together, I just need to add this because I need people agree with me. There's certain games in the NFL that should never be played at 1 p.m. or 4 p.m. on the East Coast, or for me on the West Coast, 10 or 1. And that's one of those games. Steelers, Ravens, Bills, Chiefs, Chargers, Chiefs, right? There are high key matchups that we need to see in prime time. And unfortunately, we don't get to. But I don't know. So just you mentioned that game, just got me so excited about it. I just love watching them play.
Yeah, so we have a lot of college football that's left to be played.
Yeah.
But Mason Taylor is going to be one of the top 4 tight ends selected.
Yes.
And I think he's going to be closer to one of the top 2 tight ends selected than top 4. But I'm going to tell you his floor is a top 4 tight end in this class.
Yes.
Right. Somebody might love one of the other tight ends, but really the discussion is going to be between Taylor, Warren, Loveland. And this is the last guy that Brock and I are covering today. but we are going to have tight ends and safeties coming at you with Brock every Tuesday. So we're recording on Sunday. This episode's going to air every Tuesday. We're going to cover more tight ends. We're going to cover more safeties. And this tight end class is probably going to be one of the deepest tight end classes that we have had in a long time. And that's saying something considering Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid were high draft picks 2 years ago, right? But this tight end class could be better than that one when all is said and done. So we look forward to hearing feedback. If there's a tight end you want us to watch, we will watch. We will present the scouting report. I know we have a lot of players and family of the players following the page and listening to the scouting reports on their brother, on their friend, on their son. We hear all of that feedback. So we welcome, if there's a player that you want us to cover, we would be happy to consider it. So Brock, any parting words?
Yeah, so I have two parting words. The reason why I mentioned the Bills and the Chiefs game, because I think that those are two teams that could be in on Mason Taylor come draft season because of where they're expected to pick, which would be at the lower, last 6-7 picks of the draft, essentially. And, for the Bills, yes, they have Dalton Kincaid, but when you have a guy like Josh Allen, having a 2 tight end set is very, very beneficial for them. I just want to add Dawson Knox right now. He just did sign his extension, but when you look at 2025, or more importantly, 2026, which is the true final year, I think this is potential out 2026. I believe the Bills could save, let me check, $9.6 million on Dawson Knox should they cut him, which would be another incentive for them to draft Taylor that high to pair him with Kincaid. Alongside the fact that the Chiefs, when you're looking at who their tight end twos are, Mason Taylor would clearly be better than them. And then obviously with Kelsey becoming older by the day, I believe he's in his mid-30s at this point. I think 33, 34, if I'm not mistaken. They got to look for the future. So I think this is a player that could essentially go to one of those two teams as well. So maybe today's game could decide where Mason Taylor goes. But my last parting words, I just want to thank you for having me on. It's always fun because this show is helping me get back into the groove of draft season, start preparing me for some of those deeper dives and evaluations. Any criticisms that I said of any of the players to the families, if you're upset with me, I understand and I apologize. But I think that this tight end and the safety class in general are going to be very deep. I think that you're going to have a lot of players that we haven't spoken about yet rapidly ascend in terms of the draft ranking. So I'm just looking forward to getting into it with you and talking about this with everybody else.
Awesome. So if you haven't already, follow Brock Vieira at MNS Today on X. Follow at NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I in Fanatic on X. Please like the podcast on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel. We have draft content every day. Mondays, running backs and linebackers with Jake and Josh. Tuesdays, it's going to be Brock coming at you with tight ends and safeties. Wednesdays, I believe it's edge and offensive tackle, and we have 2 different groups. We're going to have 2 different episodes every Wednesday on edge. This is a deep edge class. We can't cover it in one podcast. It's just too many players. So we've got David, Devin, with Jared and Dean on Wednesday. Thursdays, we're coming at you with the interior offensive line and defensive tackle. And then Fridays, we do corners and wide receivers. So, and that's with, I'm already forgetting people's names. That's with Randall and Bill. So follow us, check out the scouting reports. We are covering the draft like no other channel, and that's going to continue all the way up until draft day. So on behalf of Brock, my name's Jim. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, everybody.